Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're also really pleased to have been working with the Community Action Partnership on developing these resources that are primarily geared towards increasing board capacity to lead. And so today we're going to be talking about some of the newest resources that we've just completed. They have been posted to our website as of this morning, and they're also you'll see snapshots of them throughout this training today. And the purpose of today's webinar is really to introduce these new resources to the network. We find that there's a lot of information out there, and so it's just helpful, we think, to walk folks through the resource, to explain its intended use, explain why we put them together and why we think they're useful, and to try to give you a few tips for how you can take those and use those at your agency. And so I know that on the phone today, there are a number of different folks, those from community action agencies. You might be a board member. I know that there are folks also from state associations and also from state CSBG offices. And these training resources really came out of conversations that we've had with all three of those entities, the CAA, State Association, as well as the State CSBG office, on the types of training resources that would be most useful to their boards. And so we encourage you, as you look through these, as you put them to use, to give us feedback. I think both the partnership as well as CAPLAW are interested in knowing how the implementation of these tools is going, and also how you think they could be improved, because I think we're always looking to try to develop the most relevant and helpful resource for the network. So with that, we're going to be really dividing the presentation into two parts today, and they're fairly different parts because we worked on two different projects under the OSCO grant this year. The first is geared towards community action agencies that also run a Head Start program. And so these are resources that are intended to help CAAs that have to comply with both the CSBG Organizational Standards as well as the Head Start Performance Standards, which are the regulations that are issued for the Head Start program, and really looking to leverage overlapping requirements so that boards, when they're thinking about compliance with both sets of standards, can find a way to do that in the most efficient manner possible. So this is the first half of the presentation. The second half will be addressing a new public CAA orientation and training tool for board members of public community action agencies. So I just want to put that out there because I know the webinar description talked about both tools. We're going to spend about half of the webinar today talking about each. So stay tuned for that half if that's the one that you came for. For this first tool, which is, again, a series of implementation tools for community action agencies with Head Start programs, I just want to first refer you back to a crosswalk that we had developed last year. So because the tools that we developed this year connect to the crosswalk that we developed last year. So last year, we put together a tool that essentially analyzes the connections between the CSBG Organizational Standards and the Head Start Performance Standards. So again, if you're a community action agency, you run Head Start, you have to comply with both sets of standards. And we realized that there were many CAs that were looking for a way to bridge those two standards, to see where there were overlapping requirements, to see where the requirements might be different but address the same issues, or to see areas where the requirements were just completely different. There was no comparable either CSBG or Head Start requirements. So the crosswalk is intended to give you that kind of bridge between the two. And it looks like, I'll show you a screenshot of it in the next slide, but the idea is to help boards and staff members of these community action agencies leverage the intersection between these two sets of requirements. So you can find this crosswalk on our publications page, and you can see just a screenshot of where it lives on our website. And this is what the crosswalk looks like. You can download it in an editable Excel spreadsheet format, and it lists in one column, as you can see here in column A, it lists every organizational standard. So 58 standards for nonprofit community action agencies, 50 standards for public entities, and then in the column next to it, in column B, it tries to draw connections to a comparable Head Start requirement, either under the Act or under the Head Start performance standards. And what we did is we labeled the requirements, the connections, based on whether a similar Head Start requirement applies or whether a related but a different Head Start requirement applies. And so the idea there is that while the Head Start Act doesn't require the same specific action as the organizational standards, there are other Head Start rules that address the issue that is also covered in the standard. So you just have two different requirements that the agency will have to keep track of. And a good example of that you can see in this screenshot is Organizational Standard 7.3, which requires CAAs to have written job descriptions for all positions which have been updated within the past 5 years. So if you then jump over to the Head Start requirements, which are in column B, you'll see that we say that for this requirement, there's a related but different Head Start rule. And so while Head Start grantees are not required to have written job descriptions for each position, the Head Start Act and performance standards do have staff qualification and competency requirements. And these are qualifications and descriptions that should be incorporated into those written job descriptions that the CAA has to have for all positions under the CSBG org standard. So again, the purpose of this crosswalk is to really give you in one place, a snapshot of how the two sets of rules, the Head Start rules and the CSBG rules, intersect and overlap. In the crosswalk, we also give you references to the standard, so you can always refer back to either the CSBG Act, which is that 42 United States Code, or to refer back to the Head Start Act, or to refer back to the Head Start Performance Standards, which are the 45 Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. So that's the crosswalk. And our projects this year then really build upon this crosswalk, in that what we are hearing from community action agencies is, well, this is great to have, this spreadsheet that shows, the bridge between the two sets of requirements. They would like to know, how can we practically leverage, a place of overlap in one of those requirements and actually take actions to implement compliance under both CSBG org standards as well as the Head Start requirements. And so that then led us to the development of 4 implementation tools that really speak to how boards can leverage this overlap between the requirements. And so we have 4 new tools that build on this crosswalk and are intended to give you practical steps that you can take now to implement that overlap. So I'll be talking about the 4 tools that we've developed. I'll walk through each one and give you just an overview of what it's intended for, show you what it looks like, and then how we think you can use it. But you can find, again, the tools on our Crosswalk website, and I'll have a link to it in the next slide. Again, like I said, these tools are to assist with compliance where there is overlap. Each tool has 2 parts. There's the resource itself, and for all of the tools, they're templates of some form or another that you can take to then customize and develop. These are templates that are a good starting point, but will then need to be incorporated into your existing policies. In some cases, it's a bylaws provision, and you can build out the tool for your own needs. So they're all uploaded in Word format so that you can customize them. And then each tool also comes with a corresponding introductory guide. And so this guide is, again, intended to summarize the requirements and give you some tips for how to use that resource. So you can access the 4 implementation tools at the link here on this slide. you'll come to a page where you'll see all 4 tools. Okay, so to talk now about the 4 separate tools, and we'll walk through them one by one. So this first tool is to assist organizations in meeting the Head Start Organizational Standard 5.1, which requires that community action agency boards be comprised of board members as required by the CSBG Act. And so there's a tripartite board composition requirement. There's also the low-income democratic selection requirement for the process by which you would select a low-income board member. And what we've developed here is a board composition matrix because this helps community action agencies both track the tripartite board requirements as well as the Head Start board composition requirements. So if you have Head Start program, you know that Head Start has some very specific requirements for who must sit on the governing body or the board of the Head Start grantee. And so one way to help boards stay in compliance for both CSBG as well as Head Start requirements is to have this matrix that gives you, again, a one snapshot glance of all of the different characteristics of each board member. So you can see here that this matrix helps you assess the makeup of your current membership. It helps you track your individual board members' sectors, their diversity, skills, experience, and expertise. And that's important because Head Start Act requires that you have an attorney sit on the board. And so this is where you'll see one of the columns under skills, experience, and expertise is the fact that you have an attorney. And so what you're doing then is, as you're maintaining compliance, is you're scanning this matrix and seeing, do we have one board member, at least one board member, who is an attorney? And if not, then do we think about recruitment efforts when we have a vacancy open up and then rely on some of the other provisions of the Act? Or do you need to actually seat a board member who has that required expertise? The template also has a section for community connections that shows you, which part of the community this board member has a connection to and can represent. And then it has just some helpful categories that help you keep track of board member membership on your board. So the years that they've served on your board, the date that they were elected, the date that their term expires, the organization that they represent, if they come from a particular area or county, city of your service area, and then also helps you track committee membership and officer status. So again, this matrix is intended to help you meet the requirements, the composition requirements of both CSBG and Head Start, but it also is flexible in that it allows you to add additional characteristics that your board thinks are particularly helpful. So for example, if you wanted someone who had fundraising experience, that might be something that you put in the skills, experience, expertise category. Or if you're looking for someone who has a connection to a particular county commissioner, then seeing the county or area that they represent might be really helpful as well. So the matrix, is a starting point for compliance, but is also a tool for recruitment to help you think about what board members you want to add to your board. This matrix is, again, it's a spreadsheet which is editable. So if you had another funding source that had different board composition requirements, for example, if you are a CHODO, a community health organization, then you may, a housing development organization, then you may want to add requirements of those funding sources to your matrix as well. This is just an example of what the introductory guide to each tool looks like. So you'll see that it gives you a high-level snapshot of what the resource is, the intended audience, how we recommend you use it, and then it discusses the requirements that would sort of compel you to think about using this as a resource for compliance. And we then have a more detailed section at the end, how should a CAA use this resource, to really give you a sense of how we think this resource can be helpful to you. So each resource, each tool that I'll mention here has an accompanying introduction that looks similar to this, that's laid out in the same way. So we talked a little bit about this, but for this particular resource, the matrix, how can you use it? So we think that CAAs can start by reviewing the characteristics in the matrix. You might build in other requirements that come from either your state CSBG requirements. So some states have residency requirements, for example, or term and term limit requirements that apply to your board members. Those might be categories to add to your matrix. You could think about other funding requirements from different funding sources, and then just your community action agency's needs. We would then suggest filling out this matrix for your current board members so that you have an assessment of where your board stands as of today. And then to give this matrix to your governance committee and charge that committee with tracking board members as new members join and old members leave, making sure that you have an updated matrix so that you can maintain ongoing compliance with the composition requirements of your funding sources. The second resource that we have, or the second tool, is a set of low-income democratic selection procedures. So this really focuses on Organizational Standard 5.2, which requires community action agencies to have written democratic selection procedures for their low-income sector. So, one way that a community action agency that has a Head Start program can meet this requirement is to have in their written procedures a charge to the Policy Council for their Head Start program to select a representative to serve on the Community Action Agency's tripartite board. So this is an area of overlap where CAAs that have Head Start programs can really leverage the fact that they have a Policy Council, which is really a built-in low-income group that could select a board member to sit on the CAA's tripartite board as a low-income representative. At the same time, Head Start has a requirement that its board, its governing body, has to include current or former Head Start parents. So to the extent that your Policy Council representative is a current or former Head Start parent, you're also simultaneously meeting one of the requirements of the Head Start Act. So again, these tools are meant to find these little areas of overlap and really help to try to leverage that overlap and to have one person who can meet both requirements. So just to give you, this is a little bit of background, which I think most community action agencies know, is that IM 82, which is non-binding guidance from the Federal Office of Community Services, does permit a community action agency to designate another low-income group to select a low-income representative to sit on your board. You don't have to hold an open election. You can ask another low-income group to make that designation for you. And one of the groups that can do that is your Head Start Policy Council. So what is the resource? The resource looks like this: we have a template selection procedure that a community action agency can add to your bylaws, or if you have your written democratic selection procedures in a separate document, so it's not in your bylaws just refer to them, then you can add this provision to your bylaws or to another written document. And so you can see here that we've given you the instruction to consider adding this following language to your bylaws or written democratic selection procedures. And then the effect of this language is to designate your Head Start Policy Council to select a representative to serve as a low-income sector director on your board. So this is the provision. We've bracketed one part of it, which is just the decision that your CAA needs to make about whether you want to require this Policy Council representative to be a parent of a child who is currently or formerly enrolled in Head Start. And we include that because the Policy Council is primarily made up of parents of current or formerly enrolled children, but it's not exclusively made up of parents. And so you could have a Head Start Policy Council member and then that person be designated to your tripartite board who is not a parent. So that's an option for you to consider, is whether or not you want to include that additional requirement. If you do include that additional requirement, that also simultaneously meets the Head Start composition requirement. If you are adding this procedure to your bylaws, we're just noting that you also need to update the vacancy section of your bylaws. And so here we have a template provision that you can put into your vacancy section, or at least look at your vacancy section and work this in. But essentially you want any vacancy in that Head Start Policy Council seat to be filled by the Policy Council if and when the representative in that seat resigns or leaves office. So this is the resource for this tool. And again, there is an accompanying introduction that covers how you would use this resource. And I just summarize it on this slide for you, which is you want to establish a process for selecting your Head Start Policy Council member. So how will that work? How many days does the Policy Council have to designate someone? If they fail to designate someone, do they forfeit their right to designate someone? And so you want to think about that process. And then once you determine that process, work with a template provision that we've provided in this tool and insert that either into your bylaws or into a separate document with your low-income selection procedures. The third tool are a set of conflict of interest policies. And so this tool is addressing CSBG Organizational Standard 5.6, which requires all board members to have signed the organization's conflict of interest policy in the past 2 years. So Head Start does not require board members to sign a conflict of interest policy at any given time frame. That's just not part of the Head Start Act's requirements. However, the Head Start Act does have very specific conflict of interest prohibitions. So it prohibits, for example, financial conflicts of interest. And it does require grantees, Head Start grantees, to have a conflict of interest policy that extends to staff as well as consultants and agents who provide services or furnish goods to the Head Start grantee. So what we've done here is we have two template conflict of interest policies for community action agencies with Head Start. One of the policies applies to boards of directors, as you can see on the left. The other policy applies to senior staff of a community action agency with Head Start. That's the resource on the right. And both policies incorporate both the CSBG requirements as well as the Head Start conflict of interest requirements. And I will say that both of these are developed for nonprofit organizations in mind, and so they also incorporate IRS requirements that would apply to tax-exempt entities in general. So these two policies, again, are intended for you to use as a starting point. So we envision that a CAA would, first understand, kind of parse through what the legal requirements are, and we cover those in the introduction to this tool. We talk about, what the requirements are under the org standards as well as the Head Start Act. And then for the governance committee of the board to work with staff at the community action agency to review and potentially update your existing conflict of interest policy based on these templates. You could decide that you wanted to, scrap your current policy and start with the ones that we've provided here. We would just urge you to work with an attorney as you're going through that process to make sure that this template, complies with all state and local laws as well. But this is, again, an easy way to meet the Head Start Act's conflict of interest requirements, and then you just have to make sure your board is signing, your board members are signing this policy every 2 years. And we also, in the policy, have an annual disclosure form where board members and staff members are filling out an annual disclosure form, even if they're not re-signing the policy every 2 years. The last resource that we have is a shared calendar of required board actions. And so this is really building upon an existing National Community Action Partnership resource, which is a resource they put together a number of years ago, which lists all of the required board actions under the CSBG Organizational Standards. So you may know that both the org standards as well as the Head Start rules require the board to take certain actions or to receive certain documents or review certain policies as part of compliance with those rules. And so it can be tough to keep track of all the different requirements, and then to, for a board chair to be able to incorporate all of those actions into board meetings and plan to take resolutions on those actions to be able to show compliance. And so the idea behind this resource is let's put all of the Head Start and CSBG Org Standards required board actions into one calendar. And those are divided into categories, and they're based on how frequently you have to take that action. So there are 6 different categories. One is maintain, which means there is no required time frame to revisit. You just have to, the board has to make sure that there is a policy in place, or there are procedures, or that it's receiving information, but there's no specific time frame for that action. So that's the maintain category. Then you have other categories that are really based on how frequently you have to use them. So the first is more frequently than annual, or on an as-needed basis. And so if the need comes up, then the board has to take this action. There are actions that the board has to take annually, some actions that the board has to take every 2 years, every 3 years, and every 5 years. And so you'll see that what we've done is we've grouped all the actions based on those categories. And then also, if there are overlapping CSBG and Head Start requirements, we've either consolidated those onto one line so that the board can take one single action and see that it meets the requirements of both CSBG as well as Head Start. Or if the actions are slightly different but are related, we've listed them side by side in the shared calendar. So I'll show you a screenshot. This is the first screenshot of some of the way this calendar falls. And so again, this is a Word document. This is intended to allow you to customize if you wanted to build in other board actions that you have to take for other funding sources, or just for your agency. You could slot them into these 6 different categories. So you'll see that in this screenshot, you have Org Standard 5.1, which talks about the board being structured in compliance with the CSBG Act. And then immediately following that, you'll see a comparable Head Start requirement, which is also addressing board composition requirements. So we've put these 2 actions side by side because they relate to the same issue, but they're not the same requirement, so they're not consolidated into one line. Whereas in the next slide, in this screenshot, you'll see that we have certain standards that are consolidated into one line. So looking at towards the bottom of this page, CSBG Org Standard 8.4 requires that the board approve and receive the financial audit, the annual audit for the agency. And Head Start has a similar requirement that the board has to formally review and approve the financial audit. And so we've grouped these standards together so that the board can really plan to take one vote that accepts the audit, and then you can check the box saying that we've complied with both the CSBG standard as well as the Head Start requirement. So the way we, again, envision this resource being used is for, the organization to understand all of the different actions, so you have them all in one place. You might think about, again, adding other funding source requirements, so customizing this template. And then for either the board chair, or if you have a staff liaison to the board who is helping to plan, all the board meeting agendas for the upcoming year, use this calendar to plan when you're going to take these actions to meet your compliance obligations. And so, if you have something that the board needs to approve every 2 years, then, this calendar could be useful for you to say, we approved this action in this year, so we get to take the following year off, and then we have to make sure it's on the agenda again for the year following. And then, of course, this calendar is helpful for tracking compliance. So that's how we envision this tool being used. I'll just stop for a second to see if there are any questions that specifically relate to these CSBG Org Standards Head Start tools, because after this we'll move on to the public CAA training and orientation tool.
I think we just have one question that I've seen come in about the tools. All right, so it says, would a motion or resolution at the board level then have to indicate it is covering both the org standards and the Head Start requirements, or can it simply say for org standards and still cover the Head Start piece?
Great, that's a good question. You don't have to specifically reference the CSBG org standards or the Head Start performance standards or Head Start Act to be able to show compliance. All your monitor should be looking at is the action itself. So I guess the way to answer that question is you could reference in your motion both the org standards as well as the Head Start piece, but that's really not a requirement of either funding source. When you, of course, are submitting documentation for compliance, you would show that vote, and it would be the same vote that you could submit to both your Head Start monitor as well as your CSBG monitor.
All right, thank you. And that's all the questions I'm seeing for now.
Okay, great. So I'll move on to the next tool, but if you have questions that come up about this tool that we talked about, please feel free to send those in the chat box as well. We can come back to this at the end of the presentation. So the second resource that we've developed this year is a public CAA board training tool. So again, last year in 2018, we put together a board training tool for nonprofit community action agencies, and that is also still available on our website. And this year, what we've done is developed a complement to that, which is a training tool for public CAA board members. And so these tools are really coming out of requests from state CSBG offices as well as state associations. For having a common set of slides to use for training board members, and so for here it's for public community action agency board members. And I think that the feedback that we've often gotten is, there's so many different requirements for community action agency boards. We'd like to just have one common set of slides that we can take and adapt for use. And so that's what this tool is for. It's to give trainers for board members, so those trainers could be from the state CSBG office or someone from the state association who's in charge of TNTA in the state, or it could be a board chair or a staff member of a community action agency that's really trying to prepare their board members for service on their community action agency board. So I'll show you where the resource is. Again, it's on our publications page. You can see the drop down here. And then there is a section in the publications page called Training and Orientation Tool for Tripartite Boards. You can see that we have a tool for nonprofit CAAs, which is, again, not new this year, but what's new this year is to have a comparable tool for public community action agencies. The link to the download is here on this page. You can find this link. You can also, if you click that tool that I just showed you on the last page, you'll get to this page. And then here are the sections of the tool themselves. So we'll walk through each of these sections, but what you'll see is essentially what we've provided is a PowerPoint file. So it's a set of 97 slides that are broken into different sections. We have an introduction and to this tool, as well as some tips that CAPLAW is sharing with the network about how we envision this tool being used. And then you can download either the full PowerPoint so that you can have all the slides in their entirety, or if you have a training where you're trying to focus on a particular aspect of board responsibility, then you can download the specific section of that tool as well. So you can see that what we've done is broken up the PowerPoint into these individual sections. So we'll walk through each of the sections just to give you a sneak preview of what they look like, but know that you can either access the whole file or the file broken up. So this is what it looks like. It's a set of slides. This is the header slide that, again, the presenter can customize. So you can either, put your training title and date, whoever's doing your training on this slide. We, would actually prefer that you don't give us credit for it, just adapt them to your use. And so you can, take the slides, and then if you need to change the text on the slides to customize them for your state rules or for your community action agency, you can do that, customize the notes, make this your own. So this is an overview of what's covered in the PowerPoint. These are the sections that you saw on the screenshot that we looked at earlier, so you could download these sections separately. And so we'll do a quick preview of each of these sections. So the brief introduction section, this section is really intended to help presenters think creatively about how to engage with participants in the training and to create a comfortable learning environment. So you can see that we just have some, opening slides that helps the presenter get at, why folks are coming to this training today. Again, you should feel free to incorporate other questions that you might have at the outset. The next section covers the legal requirements that govern public CAA tripartite boards. So multiple laws govern the way in which a public CAA's board operates. And so this section really provides a quick overview of how each of these laws applies to a public CAA board and walks through very generally the information that is important for tripartite boards to be aware of with respect to these laws. So here is one of the slides that's in this section. So this gives you an overview of the different applicable laws. And so you can see here, and I'll talk about these, is for a public CAA, there are multiple sets of laws that you have to think about. You have to think about primarily, and first and foremost, your state and local government laws. Because public CAAs are a creation of state or local statute, oftentimes those state statutes will have many more compliance requirements and spell out the functions and the role of the tripartite board for a public CAA. Public CAAs may also have bylaws or governing documents. So unlike a nonprofit community action agency, which are required to have bylaws under your state nonprofit law, public CAAs are not usually required to have bylaws. However, we at CAPLAW do recommend that tripartite boards of public CAAs adopt bylaws or at least have some sort of governing document that talks about board operations. Of course, the CSBG Act at the federal level, as well as at the state level, if any exists, would apply, as well as block grant regulations and guidance issued by the Department of Health and Human Services. Public CAAs also have CSBG grants or agreements with the state CSBG office. And then you might have other funding requirements that could apply because the public CAA receives other funding sources. So this screenshot shows you an example of how we've added annotations to the slides. And I would say this is really, why I think this resource is so valuable is it's not just a set of slides that you can use, but it has all of these notes in them that are intended to help the presenter understand, what we're trying to cover in this slide and what's important to emphasize and talk about. So really, these are the notes that we ourselves would use if we were making a presentation to a public CAA's board. So here, like you said, we walked through, the different sets of laws. In the annotations, we flesh that out so you know what we're talking about and you know what to say. And then at the end, you'll also see we have notes to the presenter, which are really intended to help the presenter understand how to deliver this, the content in this slide. So these arrows, this content would all be in the notes section of this particular slide. For each section, we've also tried to incorporate interactive, ways to help the audience really engage with the material. And so this is an example of a quiz that we have. We have these quizzes scattered throughout the presentation to really help the audience think about the material that we just covered and then also serve as a springboard for talking about additional requirements. So this question is, the authority of a tripartite board to take action on behalf of a public CAA is established by the federal CSBG Act, true or false? So this, quiz is actually a little bit tricky, and it can seem somewhat confusing, but it really establishes an important point about public CAA tripartite boards, and it's that the federal CSBG Act does not establish its authority to take action on behalf of the CAA. Just like for nonprofit CAAs, the State Nonprofit Act is what establishes the authority of a nonprofit board to act on behalf of the organization. For public entities like a public CAA, it's really your local and state laws that might establish the authority of the tripartite board. It also could come in the form of a delegation of authority agreement, where the local governing officials would enter into an agreement or tell the tripartite board, this is your level of authority with respect to the local government. So this is an example of a quiz, and again, the annotations don't just give you the answer, but it also gives the presenter sort of detailed information about why the answer is the way it is, and then gives you additional information that you might want to mention in the course of a training. This is the next section in this tool, and when we talk about board operations. So before really diving into responsibilities, we want to talk a little bit about how the tripartite board of a public CAA functions. And this really sets a foundation for board members to operate well. And so we have these scenarios. So again, this is an example of a way to interact with the audience as you're presenting this tool. We have this scenario about how this board operates. And so here, we talk about this board member who has been on the tripartite board for a number of years, and he loves it. His fellow board members are very personable and friendly, but he is often confused about the vote that is required to take actions, as well as the number of meetings board members are required to attend. So what should he do? And so the answer we have on the next slide is really focused on the fact that the board has to operate in compliance with its bylaws, which is serves as the operations manual for the board. Again, bylaws are not required for public CAAs, but a reason that we suggest that public CAAs have them is they talk about all the information that Tony really wants to know is how often do we meet, who are the officers, what committees exist, what votes are required to be taken, what constitutes a quorum, etc. The next section talks about the role of the tripartite board. And so here we, and this is really important for public CAAs, is we talk about fiduciary duties, but also note that for public entities, fiduciary duties, the way that nonprofit community action agencies are used to thinking about fiduciary duties, those do not necessarily apply in the public context. Because, generally speaking, there is no legal requirement for board members to act in certain ways unless their local laws require it. So here's an example of one of the fiduciary duties that you typically think about for a nonprofit, which is the duty of loyalty. So we say this is not usually a requirement, but it serves as an informative guide because board members of public CAAs should still ensure that they're putting the CAA's interests above their own personal interests. And also, many local governments require conflict of interest policies, and those are required by the CSBG Org Standards for public CAAs. And so, even if you don't have a fiduciary duty of loyalty, board members do have to abide by the conflict of interest policies of that community action agency. So, we have then, some scenarios, again, an example of an interaction, an activity that you can do during the presentation. Asking attendees to look at these scenarios and ask this question, do any of these board members have actual or perceived conflicts of interest, and why or why not? And so, in these scenarios, you can see, and we can walk through each of them just, again, as a teaching tool here is, the first one, an elected public official board member votes to support only programs that benefit the constituents he represents, which make up a third of the CAA service area. So it's, again, is this a problem? And we would say, yes, this elected public official is arguably not putting, the interests of the community action agency as a whole above his own interests. He may only represent constituents who live in 1/3 of the CAA service area. However, the elected public official should be considering all of the constituents of the community action agency, and so the decisions that he makes needs to, consider all of those, all of the constituents, and so he shouldn't only be voting on programs that benefit his constituents, and voting no on all the other programs, but his duty as a board member is different from his duty as an elected public official. The second scenario here talks about a private sector board member whose neighbor is a real estate agent and has offered to help the community action agency find a building for its direct services for a reduced fee. So is this a conflict of interest? And again, this could be a tricky situation because if the community action agency has a conflict of interest policy, then it's possible that as long as those policies are followed, this conflict would go away. And so the private sector board member, the question is going to be, does this board member, is he going to be getting, or he or she going to be getting any personal benefit from this real estate agent neighbor working with the community action agency on a fee basis, even if it's a reduced fee? So likely this board member would need to disclose the relationship between himself and his neighbor, and may also need to recuse himself or herself from the deliberations and votes that are related to this transaction. So again, just helping, as you're giving this training, what you're trying to do is help your audience think about why the conflict of interest exists, so what the conflict is, but then also thinking about how do I resolve this conflict as well as comply with the organization's policies. So the last example here that we'll do is a low-income representative sits on the board of another social services provider, and that organization sometimes competes for the same grants that the CAA is seeking. So is there a conflict of interest here? Again, likely there would be, and this low-income representative would have to be careful to not share confidential information for either of the boards that he or she sits on, cannot share information with the other organization, and would need to disclose the fact that he or she is sitting on both boards, and then when that representative is serving on one board, the representative needs to put the interests of that organization above all other interests, including the interests of the other organization that this person might sit on the board of. So this one is really tricky because it's hard to take off your other board member hat, but it's important to train your board members on what constitutes a conflict of interest so that they can be on the lookout for these tricky situations. The last section of this presentation focuses on the key responsibilities of a public CAA's tripartite board. And so this section is really the meat of the presentation, and it really unpacks what it means for board members to participate actively in the development, planning, implementation, and evaluation of a community action agency's program. So the key responsibilities that we have identified at CAPLAW are these 6, and these are really hallmarks of an effective tripartite board. So we walk through, again, each of these responsibilities and how board members can take steps to fulfill these. And then we also, in these sections, have built-in organizational standard requirements that speak to the board's responsibility in each of these sections. As part of the responsibilities, we feature here a case study that was that we did on a public CAA tripartite board a few years ago. And this case study really looks at how a public CAA board, even when it doesn't have ultimate decision-making authority, as many public tripartite boards, don't have that decision-making power, still can be effective in helping the organization meet the CSBG Organizational Standards. And so this was a particularly effective public CAA board in Montgomery County in Maryland. And we look at, the steps that that board took in exercising its responsibilities. So then, to give you just an idea of what the responsibility slides look like, so this is the first key responsibility that we focus on, which is reviewing and updating and using the organization's mission. And so in this section, we talk about ways that you can help your board really engage in this responsibility. And so there's a little exercise that we put into the presentation to have board members write down their mission, describe ways in which the board works with the CAA's mission, and then think about a way that the board could better incorporate the CAA's mission in its board meetings and activities. So again, this is the training is intended to tell board members what their responsibility is, but then during that training also really engage that board member in that responsibility. We talk about why a community action agency's mission matters, and cover both the purpose of the mission, so that as board members are reviewing and updating their mission, they can be thinking about, again, why you have a mission statement and what it's trying to do and fulfill, and then also thinking about why mission matters. So with that, I think that's the end of the slides that we have for this webinar. Are there any questions about the public CAA training and orientation tool and the different sections that we covered?
All right, well, we're not seeing any questions currently, but if anyone does have any questions, please let us know. Feel free to type them in the chat box or the question and answer box.
And so I'll say for, again, nonprofit community action agencies that might be on the call, the training tool for nonprofit CAAs looks very similar to this. It has the same breakdown of sections because we think that the responsibilities for public and nonprofit CAAs are often, cover a lot of the same topics. For public CAAs, again, if you don't have ultimate decision-making authority, you may be advising and preparing recommendations for your local governing officials. We still think that boards, tripartite boards, have an important role, especially with respect to CSBG and the funds that come from the state CSBG office. And so, we would recommend that public CAA boards also take a lot of these responsibilities to heart and think about ways that they can improve or grow their effectiveness in their relationship with the local governing official. I see a question from a participant about mission creep and mission drift and asking whether these are the same. So yes, when we say mission creep, we mean mission drift, and that's when the mission of the organization can slowly over time drift away from its original intended purposes. And so this often happens when there are funding sources that you apply for that may be related to your original purpose, but also takes the organization in a slightly different direction. Again, having a clear mission statement that is both specific as well as unique to your organization can really help prevent that sort of gradual drifting or creeping over time. Courtney, I don't see any other questions. Have you received any others?
No other questions. There is a comment, though, that the public CAA training tool looks really good, and saying thank you.
Great. We hope that they'll be useful. And again, as I said at the beginning, I think both CAPLAW as well as the partnership would be very open to your feedback on how you're using these tools. And if you think there are certain topics that could be added to the tool or that you don't find helpful, please feel free to give us that feedback throughout the year. We want these resources to be used and to be used effectively. So I think with that, we'll close this presentation. Thank you for being on the webinar today, and we hope that you'll use these tools and that your boards will be more effective and efficient as a result of it. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Veronica. Everyone have a great day.